Have been distributed to you. Do we have any comments on those? If not, may I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
And a second? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Just a little housekeeping reminder. You have a microphone in front of you. You will sound a lot, everybody will be able to hear you if you make sure that your microphone is on when you speak. And without further ado, the next item on our agenda is the traffic study update. As we've been talking through this, a lot of questions have been about traffic, and Steve Goodrow is going to bring us up to speed on where we are with that, he and Jeff Hammond. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Bert. All right, as Bert said, the next few slides in this presentation involve traffic. We're going to take another look at some questions that were raised with Midtown, and then just touch on the status of what we're finding in West Nashville. Before we launch too far into the traffic, I'd like to just provide a little bit of background. First off, I think many of us know that Nashville is one of the fastest growing cities in the U.S. There's a lot of businesses and residents moving here, which is really great. However, it creates more jobs, more people, and more traffic. And so, really the big thing is, how do we keep going with that success? How do we get more people to places they want to go? And, these solutions are complex. And really what we want to do, the need here is to just move more people in some of our congested corridors. Another thing to think about is just this whole idea of traffic and congestion. The activity that goes along with traffic that would include, everyday activity that provides great quality of life, as well as how you get back and forth to work and places of recreation. Those things we want. And really, the goal is to just manage congestion itself. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jeff Hammond, who's going to talk about our micro simulation analysis that we've done for the corridor. Jeff?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Is this okay? Jeff Hammond, I'm with RPM Transportation. We are the primary model developers, primary traffic engineers on the AMP project. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes summarizing our work and what all has gone into the primary key that we are using in this analysis, being the traffic microsimulation model. I'm going to talk about three major components of that. One, I'll give you an overview about what the model actually is and what it does, including some of the scenarios that we're able to test with it. Secondly, I will give some information relevant to how we know that this is a reliable tool to even use in terms of the calibration of the model. And then lastly, we'll try to summarize some of the primary metrics that we're interested in evaluating the traffic impacts of the project on the corridor. One of the major things that the traffic model does is to look at, try to quantify some of the new growth that Steve was just mentioning. There are approximately 32 new developments in our corridor that at the time the development of the model was underway. These were provided by Metro Planning to say there are a number of projects located somewhere between right on the corridor to 1/2 mile off of the corridor that have the potential of having substantial traffic impacts to this and other roadways in the study area. And so we need to take that into account, that those things are working their way through. Some of them have since opened. Others you see driving around this part of town as they come up. Those are residential areas, those are new hotels, those are new office buildings, et cetera. So we have quantified the traffic impacts of those and have worked with Metro as well as Tennessee Department of Transportation to vet that process and how we are accounting for the increased traffic demands in the corridor. Some of the assumptions that go into the model, we've tried to be very conservative in those. First of all, we have updated the traffic counts that needed to be done, and that was done in January of this past year, so we're using the most up-to-date data that we can. Also, as I mentioned, we've gone through the forecast process, traffic forecast process with the DOT, and have gotten some buy-in onto the procedures that we're using in that. Part of that is updating those development projects as best we can, as accurate as we can. We learn about new projects, it seems like, quite often, and so we constantly have to make adjustments to those development assumptions. A couple of the conservative aspects of our assumptions that are baked into the model are in the two check mark items below. One of those being that we did not account for any modal shift in the corridor. In other words, if you're driving in the corridor now, we're assuming you're going to continue to drive in the corridor and not get on transit or do anything other than drive in the corridor. We think that will happen. We know that will happen, but we're not taking that into account in our model. So if any driver who's there now will continue to be a driver in our model world. Also, kind of along with that is the fact that we're not taking into account any diversion. That is, if the AMP goes in the corridor, traffic might divert off of that corridor. We've seen that in other areas of the country. We are working now to identify how much that might happen here, but in this model, we're assuming everyone stays right where they are now, and no one comes off of West End, goes to any other corridor. And again, it's a conservative assumption on the part of this microsimulation model. Let me talk a little bit about, I keep using that term microsimulation, and you can gather from that what we're really doing is to do our best job to simulate this corridor. It's a 7.1 mile corridor. There's a lot of different aspects to it. There's local bus service, there's on-street parking, there are pedestrians, there's all number of things that we are trying to replicate in our model world. This is different than other models that you might have heard about. You might have heard about a regional travel demand model maintained here at the MPO. That's a different model. It uses different data, uses different assumptions, and it's used for different things. What we are focusing on here is how does this corridor operate? What would the traffic impacts of this corridor be at a very small scale, a very detailed way? And so that's what the purpose of a microsimulation model is. It lets us basically build what's out there today and then play with it, make changes to it, add things like the AMP project to it, and see how that will affect traffic operations in the future. The platform we're using is simply called VISM. That's just the software. It's used by DOTs around the country. It is fairly new, but it is the most robust tool that we have that's available in the U.S. currently that will take into account things like complex transit operations like we have here. And coming out of this, we can measure a lot of different things. The three key ones are delay and queue length and travel time. We'll talk about some of those as it relates to the project. The 7 mile corridor is complex, as I mentioned, and so in order to make it a little more usable, we have broken it into two. So we actually have two models. We have an east and a west. 12th Avenue is the dividing line, actually in between 10th and 12th Avenue, right about the Tennessean building at the railroad bridge. That's the dividing line between the two models, and so we have to run those independently, just given the size of it. And then time of day, we are running all of these scenarios, which I'll show you in just a minute, based on two periods of the day. We have an AM model, east and west, and we have a PM model, east and west. Those reflect the peak travel times of the day. You might call them rush hours, any time between 7 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. These are the scenarios that we are currently evaluating, or have evaluated. There are three of them. There's an existing scenario, a no build, and a build. The existing scenario is probably pretty self-explanatory. It looks at the corridor as it exists today. Traffic volumes as they are today. Signal timing is included in that. Roadway geometrics, what lanes are there, how are those lanes used, and that kind of thing. We also have things like, as I mentioned, the on-street parking that's there today. A lot of the uses in terms of bus service and that kind of thing. All of those things are in there in the existing model as it exists today in 2014. The no-build model looks out a little bit, and it says, okay, by the year 2018, if everything else stays the same, how will traffic look and what will those impacts be on the model? So the no-build is basically the existing plus forecasted traffic. No changes to the lanes, no changes in any other way. The build model then looks at more of a comprehensive change in all of it. It looks at the forecasted traffic volumes, but also the new geometry that's being proposed as part of the project, and then other optimizations that we build into that formulate the basis of the design that's underway now. I'm going to shift a little bit to that second part of what I wanted to talk to you about, and that is some information relevant to the assurance that this is a calibrated model, that it's reliable, and that it is grounded in the real world. We have several tools to do that, and here are some resources that might be important as we talk about that. These are just calibration guidelines, and so as we develop these under federal oversight for Federal Highway Administration in particularly, that's their manual, the big yellow one on the left. I realize you can't read it. It's probably not that important. It's probably not that interesting of a read to you, but it goes into the details of how do you calibrate these models. The second one, there in the middle, the white one, is the Oregon Department of Transportation guidelines. Tennessee does not currently have guidelines for microsimulation models, so we're borrowing this from another state. We're looking at what do they require in terms of how closely must your existing condition model meet the real world condition. And then lastly, some information from the software developer itself, PTV, which is a European software manufacturer headquartered here in Portland, Oregon. We calibrate to three different things. We calibrate to traffic volumes, we calibrate to travel time, and then we make some lesser formal observations in the way of calibration to queue lengths. So let me talk about those, starting with volumes. I think this is the only equation I have in here, so I apologize even for this one, but we tried to limit those. The GEH statistic is what traffic engineers use to compare modeled volumes to what is actually occurring on the roadway. So we find that if we have a GEH statistic somewhere less than 5, we're in good shape. If you're in between 5 and 10, you might want to look at that data a little bit more, especially if you have a lot of those instances, and then anything above 10. And it basically just takes into account the relative volume of all of these roadways compared to the model volume on them. We don't need to go through all the numbers. It is a snapshot of our running of this GEH analysis, and what we find is that we have 518 individual intersection approaches in the model for the AM and PM conditions. 514 of those we found to be well within inside the GEH guidelines. There are 4 of those that are in that between 5 and 10 threshold. So we look at this and we say that we're very confident in the ability of the model to forecast and evaluate the correct volume of traffic going through these intersections. If you look at the far right-hand column, for most of these, you see that we are well within 5. We're very low on the GEH statistic. That's a good thing. It just tells us we're able to accurately replicate real-world conditions in terms of volumes. But another thing that we have to look at is, you're going to laugh. It's a guy's initials. It was developed as Jerry Hughes or something like that. He was a transportation planner in London back in the 70s, and he came up with the GEH statistic. So you can Google it. I think that's the name. But so what it looks at is if you have an interstate. Back to the equation. Yeah. So what it's looking at is I'm surprised, I'm glad there's so much interest in this. This is great. It looks at the output traffic volume that we're actually getting out of the model. When we key volumes into this model, it doesn't necessarily do exactly what we tell it, okay? And this goes for a lot of different aspects of the model. We key information in, it uses algorithms based on transportation research, and begins to simulate those. So if I run the model 2 times, I'm going to get 2 different answers. Just like if you go out there 2 different days of the week and take a measurement, you're going to get 2 different answers. It does variability based on observations, just like happens in the real world. And so every time we run these things, we look at how well did this set of model runs replicate what we told it to do. And that's what it's doing here. And it takes into account the fact that, if we tell it we've got an interstate, say we want to model, and it's got 100,000 cars a day, and it models it to 90% and says, okay, we think you've got 90,000 that day. That's different than a 10% if we've got a roadway volume that only has 100 cars a day. So it takes into account the weighting of different traffic volumes on the roadways. Okay. It just tells us that the model is producing accurate, statistically accurate volumes. Yes, sir?
That's vehicles and not necessarily people, so if you have a high pedestrian traffic area, it's not necessarily measuring that necessarily.
Exactly. This is based on vehicular volume, correct. Okay. We do something similar and have similar guidelines for travel time. And this might be important because there's 2 different ways. And it's kind of like I was talking about earlier. If we're measuring a very short travel time, we need to be probably in closer conformity with that than if we're measuring a really long travel time. So there's more error as we stretch our travel time out longer from a model standpoint. So if we have travel time for a segment that we're measuring that's greater than 7 minutes, we need to be within 15%. This is what FHWA tells us. That pertains to the west model. So if we're looking at St. Thomas to 12th Avenue, that travel time is greater than 7 minutes. We need to be sure that we're within 15% of what we're actually measuring for that segment of the corridor. If we go over to the east side and we look from about LP Field out to 5 Points on the east end of the model, that for most runs is less than a 7-minute travel time. So we need to be sure that we're within plus or minus 1 minute of what we actually observed. That's how we read that, and that's how we know that we are in conformity or not based on our calibration standards. We are in conformity, and this is the information that we're getting out of the model from a travel time perspective. This is both of the top 2 lines are west in different directions, but the important thing to note is that the model travel times are within the range that would be set forth by FHWA criteria for calibration. Okay. We'll come back to travel times because I know we're interested in those. I'm going to show you maybe a little better formatted look at that. And here it is. This is the first one is I'm going to show you 2. The first one is the west end of the model. So we understand from a traffic impact look and understanding is that this is the critical traffic side of the model. The west has many choke points, many other places where congestion is an issue compared to the east. East has a couple, but west is where we've had to put pencil to paper a lot harder to try and detail these types of results. The existing, let me show you how to read this. This gives you 2 different columns of information. Both of them are peak direction, peak hour. So in other words, this one is inbound in the morning, eastbound in the morning. This one is outbound in the afternoon. So if that makes sense, that's the peak direction during the peak hour of the day, the one we're all stuck in traffic in and interested in. So existing, what the model says is that today you can drive that from St. Thomas Hospital to 12th Avenue, just on the other side of the railroad gulch, in right at 15 minutes. Okay, that's what the existing conditions model. That's with existing traffic, existing signal, and all of that. And that meets what we found actually driving, doing multiple drives and taking data for the actual observed conditions. Under the no build condition, that goes back to the 2018. If we just grow the traffic and put that in the model, we get a travel time of 19 and a half minutes. And we just detailed, just for understanding, that's about 30% slower than what it is today. Okay, that's what the model results are telling us under that 2018 build and the 2018 development condition. With the build condition, with the AMP included, the lanes as are incorporated in the design at this point, improvements we've had to make to traffic, lane redesignations we've made to traffic, and so forth, as part of designing this to have minimal impact on traffic, we're getting travel times in the morning peak direction of right at 16 minutes, okay? Which is, again, for understanding, about 18% lower than this number, than if you hadn't have done it, okay? The bottom line talks about how long does it take if I'm a passenger on BRT. The reason that has a range is because at this point in our design, we have not settled on what the strategy will be for something called transit signal prioritization. That is, what advantage is, if any, do we give to a transit vehicle who might be approaching a signal as it's about to turn red. So if we use, again, FHWA guidelines for what impact full TSP can have, we might see something on the order of 13 and a half minutes. If we don't do anything, right now the model is telling us it's going to take a passenger trip about 15 minutes. That includes boardings and alightings and dwell times and all of that. Yes, sir.
When you did the simulation, was that the AMP as originally designed, or the AMP with the changes that have been made throughout, with doing away with the center lane from St. Thomas to 440 and also from basically 17th across the interstate?
Good question. So I mentioned that we kind of kicked off this rebuilding of the model back in January, and that was because that's when our new traffic counts were made and ready. I believe it was in April, the announcement was made that the corridor would change a little bit. And so to that point, we had been fully designing full center running segregated lanes. This, however, in April, we shifted, began to work on the new alignment, and this reflects the new alignment. So we have mixed use sections as was given to us across the I-40 bridge and then through from 440 west through the end. So this does include the center and mixed running scenario, the latest scenario.
As it is presently anticipated to be.
Yes, sir.
Have you got a breakdown from 12th Avenue through downtown to show?
We don't. And let me say a word about downtown. And I do have the east side. We can talk about that. Downtown is a little bit different. And downtown is, I can show you the east. This is the east side, the same type of information. But downtown from 12th to the other side of the river, we don't have. And we can provide that. But what happens in downtown is we don't really have any segregated lanes. It's all mixed traffic. The AMP operates just like a car does in the car lane. And so there's really there's not much difference between the existing and the no build and the build. It all kind of works the same. There's really no impact to traffic. It's just that you've got a bus in the traffic stream now that you didn't have before. But we can certainly get those numbers.
I may be jumping ahead, but Mark or somebody, do we think that the feds will buy these numbers?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by buy these numbers, but
I tried to short circuit. Would these numbers be sufficient to allow them to give us money for the AMP?
yeah, I think so. And I think, a better way to answer that is I think they would like the model. I think the quality and the sophistication of the model is what they'd be most interested in, and then the results of the model will follow. So, I think what they're looking for is the quality of the model.
I understand that, but if the model were well designed and showed no difference in times, that they might wonder why they use federal money for that.
Right. And so then
you think this is sufficient?
So then if they are satisfied with the model, then I think the results are good.
Okay.
Jeff, I have a question. Going back to the West End, St. Thomas West End to 12th Avenue model, it looks to me as if depending on which direction you're going, we'll pick up 3 or 4 minutes on about a third of the proposed route. is that going to be worth $50 million? Do you have a dollar value study?
I don't have a dollar value. I don't have it in terms of benefit to cost ratio and what this time really reflects in terms of dollar cost savings. Kind of going back to the last question, we have reviewed other work from other BRT systems around, and sometimes you find that traffic actually gets slower, when lanes go and they're used for something else, and those systems go in and continue to perform and meet the objectives of those communities. So the fact that we actually can show a slight increase or slight improvement maybe, I think that's a positive on our side that we can go in and make this level of a change and still achieve relatively low level of traffic impact.
Keep in mind also that we're only talking about a 4-year window here, and that as time continues on, that the traffic will get progressively worse.
So exponentially, the value should increase. All hypothetical.
So I mean, the gaps in these estimates would change.
A couple of questions on the assumptions. You showed traffic increase each and every year by what percent?
I believe it's 0.5% background traffic growth.
And has that been justified by historic increases over the last 7 or 8 years?
It's pretty standard, and what we have
But did you base it on what has actually happened in traffic? Has it increased at 0.5% over the last, say, 7 years?
Some. There are more than one. There's more than one traffic count station in this corridor. There might be 6 or 7 that any one of them you could say, well, this corridor grew or decreased. Some of them have decreased. This is a case where we kind of follow our DOT's protocols in that we never assume traffic is going to go down over the long course. So we've assumed a amount of growth at 0.5% per year that is pretty standard for what you might find in urban areas. In a rural area, we might grow about 2 or 4% per year. But in areas like this, we just don't see a lot of background growth. What we do have and what's playing the bigger part of the traffic projection role is the specific developments that we know are coming and the trip generation process that's used to determine what those trips are.
Well, your assumption, excuse me, Richard, when you say you never assume traffic will decline, as a matter of fact, when TDOT does its counting of traffic annually at key points, over the last 15 years, traffic has in fact at I-440, I-40, 10th and 11th, and at 16th been declining. So not wanting to show a decline seems to me perhaps at least one chink in your model. And it certainly raises some concern on my part that there may be others, and those of us who are not engineers or skilled at reading this kind of material may need a little time to take a look at these and make sure we're asking all the questions we need to ask.
And it sounds to me like you are making some assumptions based upon other cities and other urban environments around the country, not Nashville's experience.
If you could be more specific, such as?
Well, you said it's pretty standard to assume a 0.5% increase each year. So that's standard according to other cities?
No, sir, Tennessee DOT.
All right, is that citywide, statewide?
Well, again, we have to look at, and we have the actual traffic count stations summarized, and we have to look at it and sometimes make a judgment call when we're looking at a number of traffic locations. Some have gone up, some have gone down. In the order of things, it falls about 0.5%. But I can't point to one and say, look at this, and that wouldn't be an honest way to do it anyhow. So we have to use some judgment, it's true, to look at the breadth of data that's available and make the best call that we can on that.
What we've been doing is working hand in hand.
I had them disconnect yours.
Okay.
You got a lot of power, Lee.
We've been working hand in hand with TDOT to make sure that our forecast doesn't over-forecast or under-forecast. And so everything that we've been doing, we've been reviewing with them in detail, and 0.5% growth is pretty modest really for like a background level in an urban area. And I think as Jeff pointed out, the bigger part of the growth is really these documented developments that are actually going to happen. That's probably driving that growth in traffic more than the background piece. So, but we are following what TDOT expects out of their design process, and so we're just, kind of treading along step by step with them in every way. So we're following the necessary steps.
Well, Steve, while you're at the mic, or perhaps Jeff will know this. In this model, how do you account for the facts? I mean, I understand applying the model, but it's like in the law. You've got the rule of law, but then you've got the facts. And for you to persuade me, I guess I need to see how the model applies to the actual facts. For example, school zones, cross traffic. The possibility that a lot of businesses that are currently on the corridor will perhaps have to go elsewhere in order to conduct their business because you're taking their loading zones and their parking. So how does your model actually take in some of the extremely important, call them human factors, if you will?
Yeah, and that goes back to the calibration. That's why we talked about some pretty ugly looking stuff there to try and demonstrate that that's the best information that we have that details the travel aspects. Now, whether someone can park in front of a business and things like that, that's out of the scope of the model. It can't do that. But things like if we can't model what is actually happening today, again in terms of travel time, volume, and so forth, we don't feel very good about how we model the future. And so we have to get today right, and that's why we showed that, and we feel very confident in its ability to model the current condition. Now, from that point going forward, we have to rely on the model. That's correct, and that's why we go to such work to make sure it's working correctly in the existing condition before we can even think about moving into the future.
Are there some places where this model has been used that you could come back to us and say to us, all right, in Denver or in Portland or in Orlando or somewhere, this model was used and 5 years later it proved pretty close or not close? Or, I mean, do we have any history on this?
The VISTA model is used almost in every BRT project. And the goal is exactly what Diane was getting at. It does have all the facts in it. We incorporate pedestrian crossings. We actually have incorporated the local bus stopping in it. So, I mean, all of those kinds of details are in this model, and that's why it's used.
So if it's used elsewhere, can we learn that?
Yeah.
I mean,
For example, was it used
Yeah.
in Grand Rapids?
Yes, it was used in Grand Rapids.
Now, Grand Rapids
is
is built considerably
Right.
differently from Nashville. It's on a grid.
Yeah, it's on a grid, and they used, dedicated peak hour lanes for that project. The Health Line used it. We're using it on Ashland Avenue, at least in segments. But it's the best model to really model the multimodal condition of a corridor like this. It takes into account of cars and existing buses and pedestrians.
Grand Rapids uses curb lanes.
Dedicated curb
lanes, yeah.
Yeah, peak hour.
It would be helpful to see how the model has worked or not worked.
Right. I don't have any
that's
before
doable.
after.
I mean, not right now,
comparisons,
but
sure.
over the next month, that'd be great.
I have a question to both Jeff or Steve. Earlier it says existing, no build, and build. There was three model with signalization. Existing signalization, no build model is with existing signalization. Build model is signalization, prioritization, those fancy things. Is there a study with no build with optimized signalization? The reason I'm questioning is AMP build model is decreased in speed compared to no build, but is this from optimized signalization or coming from lane shift? I just kind of curious about these numbers.
That's a really great question. As you can see up there, you have 19 minutes and 16 minutes. And as Nina was pointing out, the difference is, if you look back a couple slides, the 19 uses the existing signal system, which I believe was updated, in 2011? So there has been some updates to it already. But what's happened is we've done a number of things to the corridor to actually speed up the traffic. One, of course, is, as you can imagine, with transit signal priority, the through traffic is also going to get green when the bus gets green, so there's an improvement there. The other part of it is just what in highway terms is called access management. We're going to be having a curb median down the middle of the road, eliminating some of those left turns at mid-block. That actually increases the flow of traffic. So that's another way that time could come down. And then clearly the other piece is we're going to optimize some signals throughout the corridor, again, to help move traffic along.
Let me ask, the traffic times, I think, is it Mina or Mina? Mina. Mina's question's an excellent one. The ideal comparison would be in the future if you did all the things that you do to in building the AMP, except for the bus itself. In other words, if you take away on-street parking, if you improve the signalization, what would the traffic times be in 4 years from now if you did everything except use dedicated lanes?
And that is a question, the answer to which we don't have, going back to that there has not been a study to say if you did all of those things, what would happen. Now, we need to be sure we consider. That means widening at Murphy Road and relocating sidewalks. Does that mean putting an extra lane in there that's not there now? There are some things that are happening from this, because of this project or as part of this project, meant to facilitate traffic staying, as at least as well as it does, now. So you could do those things, and you would do a much bigger roadway project. And yes, I think it's fair to say that there is a car-only solution to some of this. I think it is shorter term. Some of our previous work would speak to that. But there's not a study now that I can give you that would detail what those results
Also, have you studied what the impact would be on the cross traffic? In other words, on streets that go perpendicular to West End Harding Road because of the AMP project, if it's installed, how is that going to impact people going cross town, cross traffic?
That's something that's in development now,
But it hasn't been done yet?
No, it's there. It's there. It's in review by TDOT as well, but it is there.
So even if you say that it improves traffic by whatever percent along West End, it may increase traffic times for side streets, increase traffic. What about the other side streets that run parallel in neighborhoods and stuff?
Right, and we've not gotten to the point of detailing what the traffic delay or travel time impacts would be, but we are coming to a pretty clear picture of how much traffic is actually going to divert. And then the next step to that is figuring out, well, what did that mean in terms of delay or travel time for those other corridors?
Okay.
So the Beaman plan is just to eliminate all parking? Is that? No, I'm just kidding.
One final question, or we can make up others. One final question for me. Have you done, and I doubt that you have, an analysis of travel times if we had curbside service, peak hour service for dedicated lanes only, and compare that option to having tearing up the middle of West End?
I think some of the original alternatives analysis work spoke to some of that in terms of travel time for different BRT configurations. But
We would love to see that if you would like to provide it.
It would be nice to know that if you did a study of curbside, dedicated peak hours only, at a fraction of the cost of what y'all are proposing, what is the difference there?
We haven't done that.
Okay, I didn't think you had, but don't you think that's a fair thing to do?
That's not within the scope of what we're looking at.
What?
And then I think that begs the question, why isn't it within the scope?
This is the design that we've been working on the whole time.
Meaning you're working with what you got handed.
This is the project and the scope that we've been working on. And we said that at the beginning.
That's too bad.
So Jeff, how hard is it? You got an assumption of a 0.5% growth in traffic. How hard is it to just plug in numbers at 1 or 2%? Is it just a matter of re-entering values, or is it like a completely different traffic study?
It's pretty different. I mean, to go through the refinement to come up with numbers like this, it would take a while.
Is that because it's again, is it entering values in, or what would need to change? I mean, this apparently very strong and powerful predictive mechanism that VisSim does, how does it do what it does in terms of entering in the traffic increase assumptions?
Well, the actual keying in the information and letting the model run is okay. At that point, though, you need to look at it and refine and say, okay, I've got delays on this movement here. I want to try and do something about those. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to tweak these signal timings. And it's like we're working with a small world here and trying to figure out what's the optimized way to time these lights. That's where the time comes in.
Ben, you also, you don't want to just randomly put in numbers. I mean, you want to use what the industry, what the DOTs and TDOT are comfortable with, so that you have a good model.
I have a question. You said that you had some buy-in by TDOT on the forecast of traffic increase, future traffic increase. The word some, I'm questioning that because carefully crafted words are important here. Does that mean that TDOT approved and bought in on all of your assumptions of future traffic increases, or did they not?
We don't have anything written from TDOT, if that's what you mean by approved. We are awaiting that. We had a series of meetings where we went to TDOT and sat down and said, here's our fact sheet in terms of a spreadsheet that showed all the developments that are in the program, the raw traffic generation, the reductions. These are just industry standard things that we do. How we distribute those traffic projections onto the network, and went through all of that. And at the end of that, they were comfortable in us progressing into the traffic modeling aspect.
So technically, you do not have officially buy-in from TDOT on your future traffic projections?
I don't know what that means.
We're still working with TDOT. We're not at the point yet where they've made that decision, but the point that we are at, they're comfortable with the model. They're very comfortable with the model, and they're comfortable with the process. We've showed it to both TDOT and to Metro Public Works, and we've also talked to FTA about it, and all three agencies are very comfortable with the approach and the way that the model is set up. And but we aren't finished with that process.
I was asking
yet.
Specifically about the future traffic projections.
Well, that's
inherent in that, and they've been brought in and discussed that with us.
Okay.
There's a logic that if you're comfortable with the way the model is set up, then you're more than likely comfortable with the results that it provides. It just stands to reason.
It's the input into it on the future traffic projections.
They're
Let me just jump in here. We didn't move ahead until we felt that TDOT was agreeable to our process and the numbers we're putting in. The next step is now they're reviewing they're reviewing a report that we put together, and we're kind of in that process now. But we're just working with them we didn't start this whole model without some dialogue and some acceptance of the numbers we're putting in.
Like for instance, they chose the year 2018. That's the model. That's the year they wanted us to model to. So we've had that kind of interaction with them.
All right.
That kind of advice.
And it's my understanding that the Federal Transportation Administration has recommended a software program that is not this VISSIM. Can you address that issue about why you're not using the software model that they have suggested?
Well, probably not specifically, because I'm not aware of what they have said or why they would say VISM is not adequate for use. It may go back to if it's a different type of a model for a different analysis, like we were talking about that diversion analysis, the fact that traffic might shift from this corridor onto another one. That doesn't use this model, it uses a different model, and that's the one I referred to earlier, that is the regional travel demand model. Less detailed, but more robust in how big of an area it looks at, basically. Maybe in whatever documentation you're referring to, that's what they were commenting on. I don't know, but no, I can't comment on that.
And this, let me just say, this again is a design tool that's been used many times on BRT projects that FTA has been agreeable to. I'm not sure if you're talking about the MPO model, that's the regional model, but there's a lot of different models. So, if we had specifics what that was, we could let you know what that means. But this model has been used repeatedly.
Okay.
And then I just want to jump in one more item. I know we had talked about looking at an option where we just improve traffic flow and signals on the corridor. I mean, that is certainly something that can be done, but that particular option really is sort of a short-term solution for traffic, because all you would do is just improve it for traffic flow. Bus rapid transit system also increases the capacity on the corridor by a lot by allowing a system that can move people rather quickly at the same time that autos are working. So think of them as different, because with a BRT system, you end up with cars working in their lanes, as well as buses moving people at a high capacity. So they're not really apples to apple kind of a comparison. So, Jeff.
So back to your statement that you're working closely with TDOT. Do you have a timeline for submitting your 810 certification to TDOT?
We're working on it. It's not ready to go in yet. And we understand the process for that. It's not ready to go in yet.
Diane, that follows the NEPA. 810 follows NEPA.
So that gets to my next question, which is, we keep talking about NEPA, but it never seems to, that peanut doesn't seem to move closer to actual having the NEPA report and analysis.
Right. Well, one of the things we're waiting on is to conclude the CAC. FTA wanted this.
You mean we're holding up NEPA?
No, you're not holding it up, but we can't move the peanut until we finish the CAC.
Why is that?
Because the public outreach is a section of the NEPA.
You mean this is going to count as public outreach?
Absolutely.
I'm stunned.
Well, then you're stunned. It's going to be part of then it's part of it. FTA specifically asked us, when we told them we were going to do a CAC, to make sure that was documented in the NEPA process.
Well, then, I hate to beat a dead horse. In fact, I don't think I have ever beaten a dead horse or a live horse. But if this is to count for public dialogue,
it's one
then
aspect.
I take us back to where I started. All the more reason that this committee have a disclosure of conflict of interest policy.
So could I just ask one last question? And then, speaking of moving the peanut, I think there's more material here. The device you've used for the modeling is considered a standard device in the industry and with people that do these kinds of assessments, right?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And my question is, Mr. Chairman, could we move to the next element? Because I think we've had an awful lot of discussion here.
I'm glad to make sure that we've got as much discussion out there as we want questions. We've got these guys that are here today for us to discuss it. So I want to make sure that there is ample time to get through all that. Yes, Lee?
In your calibration model, you used the state of Oregon. Were there not any southeastern states that you could have used that might have been more applicable to Tennessee?
What we used that for was calibration standards, so potentially that one's readily available on the internet, and so we went and got that one. We could have polled other southern states. North Carolina would probably be the closest to us that might have such a published standard that's been through their process, but we would expect it would be very, very similar in terms of calibration standards. And that's also why we balance it against a federal perspective from microsimulation.
Jeff, I have a question in regards to the downtown corridor. I want to make sure I understood you correctly. That in the ridership and the estimates of time, you said since there wasn't any dedicated routing through downtown, that y'all really haven't looked at that. Is that correct or not? And and let me follow up and I'll turn you loose. If that's the case, my question is if that's on a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon, if anybody really rides through this, it's pretty much gridlock. You know, there's nothing smooth about going through downtown. Mm-hmm. So how would that affect the riders on buses, you know, out through the corridor in St. Thomas to 12th Avenue, and then perhaps if they're trying to get to East Nashville on the other end? You know, I'm just curious how you're playing that into the model.
Yeah, I'll take that part first. It'll slow them down. I mean, it's a slow segment
model.
It's in the model, yeah, but it'll slow. And it's included in not in these, but we could give you a travel time that would include the downtown portion, and it certainly will be a slower part of the travel through downtown. Anywhere we have a place where we are sharing lanes, and then there's congestion there, it's going to be a slower segment. Downtown, no exception.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily curious about the time to get from 8th, you know, to the bridge going towards East Nashville. I'm just curious how that's going to impact. And if it's figured into this, you know, I'll go with what you're saying. It's remarkable that somebody could make that trip.
Yeah, no, it's not. The limits of what this looks at are at the top in that blue box. This is St. Thomas to 12th Avenue.
Right, I got you.
It does not go all the way through downtown.
But if someone was trying to get to East Nashville, then that certainly would impact
You would need
them.
to add that in.
You know, it'd be significant. And that's, you know, as Steve said earlier, this is bus rapid transit. So I just always come back to who's going to really ride this thing. You know, and if it takes them 40 minutes to get somewhere, I think they're going to choose an alternative. And my last question is on the TDOT portion of this. I don't think anybody's really impressed with the growth of our infrastructure in the last 10 years in downtown Nashville based upon TDOT. So if they're allowing for a 0.5% growth in our traffic, is that based on some model that they did 15 years ago, or what is that data? I'll be curious about the timeline, because we're not the 50th fastest growing city. You know, we've accelerated, I think, beyond anybody's expectations in the past 7 to 10 years, and I don't see that slowing down. So I don't know what in real life, what a 0.5%, does that mean 5,000 cars, 50,000 cars? You know, I'm just not real trustworthy of TDOT right now, at a risk of offending anybody with TDOT. But our interstates have kind of sat dormant for a substantial amount of time under their control.
Agreed. You know, in terms of it not been much work done on the interstate, that's pretty apparent. I can say that the data that comes from, how we derive that, goes back to the number of traffic count stations, and we look at that, and we do our best to come up with what the historic growth of that is.
So if Lee can be well, I'll be glad. I knew that everybody would be excited to see this traffic data, and I'm glad to keep answering questions. But after the two of y'all, if there are things that, go ahead. Lee.
Who, me?
Yeah.
All right. Assuming that if we were to go ahead and assume a 0.5% growth in traffic along that route, over the 4 years that we're talking about, that would be a 2% increase in traffic. I understand that if you were talking about a piston and a cylinder, if you increase the size of the piston 2%, it probably is going to stop completely. I understand that. But in traffic, that's different. A 2% increase in traffic, you're basically saying that there's a 31% increase in travel. It'll slow it down by 31% with a 2% increase in traffic.
No, don't forget that other development traffic, 32 new developments, and we said that's where the bulk of the traffic forecast is being generated. It's a lot of traffic. You know, when we have 300 units at several places along the corridor, you know, a number of new things that are planned or working their way through the development process, that's where most of that new traffic comes from. So no, it is a much more substantial overall traffic picture that we are analyzing under the no build and the build conditions than just the 2%.
Okay.
One of the arguments for the AMP in the very beginning was to have a system that could get you from East Nashville to St. Thomas Hospital in substantially quicker time than they could if they were using their automobile. But now a lot of this, the design has changed, particularly going through town. And you've bitten this off in little chunks. You're showing us from St. Thomas to 12th Avenue. And then you show some part on the other side of town. But basically from 12th Avenue to LP Field, that could take more time. So the percentage would be much less than if you were taking the AMP the entire route. It may not be any better than it is today. Have you done that study from one end of the route to the other?
We could easily provide a total. We have not done that. And that doesn't mean, going back to your question, the first part of it, that we haven't looked at it. We have, but there are reasons why showing an analysis of downtown doesn't help further our understanding. For instance...
Or it doesn't, and also it doesn't help further your argument.
Well, for instance, all of the signals downtown are pre-timed. That means there's very little that we can do to help either car traffic or AMP traffic because they're all using the same lanes. And certainly we can provide a full travel time picture for anyone who might make that trip from 5 Points to St. Thomas. Okay.
Any other things? Let's move on to the, let's keep going. It's fascinating.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to sit here like a potted plant, but there's been a lot of discussion both ways, pro and con, about what we need to do. I think all of us are very aware that the congestion in this city, we need to do something about it. Whether this is the correct model and the scope, as Mark has said, I'm not sure. But I would hope that we all know, and we all senior folks, that with progress comes a lot of displacements and a lot of inconveniences for people. So we need to not only think about something personal, some self-interest. Probably folks stop riding the bus, Lee's not going to sell any cars, but that's doubtful also. So I think we need to really, really look at this thing so that we can do something. You know, I've told you, I'm 81 years old. Hell, when this comes into effect, I probably won't be here. So I would hope that we could come to a consensus here on this plan and do something about it. Because I agree that I've heard a lot about tax dollars for the folks and what have you. All of it's going to change. So, you know, without just being here listening and hearing Lewis talk real good and Mina talk real well and Richard giving us hell, let's kind of move on, and whether we can turn left at 12th Avenue to get some gas or not, Rich, we can go to a turnaround. So please, let's try to move on with this and come to a consensus in some way. And, you know, we're not going to make a final decision. It's going to be somewhere else because we're just a committee or something that's sitting here. And whether FTA and whoever else is going to listen to what we say, I don't know. But I just beg of us let's try to get together with all of the fancy numbers. And traffic is just terrible. And we need to do something about it. And it's not going to get any better. Because folks are coming to town. Where the hell all of these folks living as these new condos and apartments going up? You know, I've been in Nashville all my life. I've never seen anything like this. So let's do something. I think we got a good committee, and I agree with you, Lee, on a lot of things you're saying, and you too, Richard. But we got to do something.
Oh, and we all agree with that.
Okay.
One thing that has come out of all of this is that I think there's a greater public awareness that something has to be done to improve the transit system in our region. I mean, if we don't address it today, it's going to get worse, and eventually it's going to be just something that's going to really start to stymie our growth. What I would hope that would come out of this is that we begin a comprehensive mass transit or transit study, and also a way to implement the plans from that study. And so that we can, in the future, have a transit system that is second to none in this country. And when I say a transit system, it may include mass transit, it may include bicycles, it may include improved carpooling, whatever it is, but we need to have it done. Our problem with some of us in this thing, Arnett, is that this has just taken a little section, and it's been poorly designed from the beginning, and we've had to make substantial changes. We as a committee, we have accomplished that. But at the end of the day, the consensus should be, Mr. Mayor, we want you to spearhead a comprehensive transit program for this community, along with our surrounding communities and mayors, and find the funding and build a system that, again, is second to none. That is the consensus I would like to see.
Richard.
And I agree with you. I agree.
Thank y'all both very, very much. I think you speak what you're saying pretty consistently together is what we all really think. So thank you both. Jeff, Steve?
A couple other aspects of transit we'll cover. This is pretty standard, the fact that we will take a corridor and we'll try to optimize it. And we try to optimize it for traffic, and we try to optimize it for transit and any other mode that might be out there. But we can't get overzealous in that, because if we're only optimizing the main direction of travel, we might be inadvertently leaving people on the side streets, on people trying to get onto West End in this corridor, sitting for a long time. And so one thing we want to do is make sure we look at overall intersection delays as well as corridor travel times. And so I'm going to show you that here very briefly. Some of you may be familiar with level of service terminology, A, B, C, D, E, and F. And we use those terms, and those come from Highway Capacity Manual. It's an industry standard which equates a level of service A with less than a 10-second delay if we're talking about level of service at a signalized intersection. And you can see the chart here. It goes all the way down to F, which simply means you have more delay than 80 seconds. That can be reported on per approach, per lane, or the intersection as a whole. Let me just see if I can summarize, and again, a lot of a table full of numbers and letters here. These are just, pretty cursorily, I guess, shown as the critical intersections. These are the ones that first come to our mind when we start analyzing this corridor and saying these are the critical ones, things like Bowling, the interchange ramps, Murphy Road, 31st, et cetera. And so we just wanted to show these. This is a little bit different than what we looked at earlier. This is not travel time in terms of minutes and seconds. This is seconds of delay. So how long might I sit at any one of these signals? And it is averaged, a weighted average across the whole intersection. So not just traffic on the main line or not just traffic on the side streets, but everybody. So if I have a lot of delay for a few amount of cars, that's one thing. If I have a lot of delay for a lot of cars, that's much worse in the eyes of the level of service analysis, okay? A couple of things I would point out here. And Bowling, I think, is a good example of what you see at a lot of these intersections. Today, we're at 31 seconds of delay based on this analysis of existing AM peak. If we don't do anything under the no build, we go to 44, and under the build, we stay roughly similar to what it is today. Now, I wouldn't get too caught up on the numbers and say, we're saying we can actually improve over today. Okay, I mean, as we look at this as practitioners, we say we can keep a very manageable amount of delay at Bowling compared to what is experienced today. And you see kind of that pattern all across Bowling. That's fairly standard for most of these intersections. Sometimes you get something like what we see at Murphy. We have 42 seconds, level of service D. We think it would go to 44, but if we do this project, we actually increase a little bit. And that goes back again to how have we timed the signals? What are the traffic volumes? How does the amp fit into all this? How much time did we give the amp? We could go in and we could change these things a lot of different ways and come up with a lot of different numbers. This is our best guess as to what impacts this might have. And so we look at all of these things, and we can look at them individually, and we could try to change that. You see in the PM peak, we actually get better by about 10 seconds, whereas we got worse by about 10 seconds in the AM. So intersection levels of service go up, they go down, they sometimes don't change, and overall we're trying to give you some results that help you understand what the impacts of the project might be. And I think that's on the next slide. We've kind of summarized that. We'll go ahead and take a look at that. And so what we find, if we were to look at all the intersections, all 55 signalized intersections in our model, and break those down instead of looking at them one at a time like I just did, we kind of take on a whole. I think we get a better picture for how we think this will operate. We look at the overall increase in signal delay for the build case compared to the existing being about 3 seconds, which is less, slightly, than the overall signal delay under the no build case, okay? And so we find in that we would really stress, going back to the point we made earlier about we can provide a pretty substantial amount of capacity in the corridor and not have big impacts on traffic based on our design and what we're able to do with the traffic aspect. Some of these others are just some more points about, again, trying to take a lot of numbers and a lot of analysis and boil it down into something that's understandable. Even though sometimes our signal goes up, they always remain below acceptable levels, okay? And that's important to note. In the west side of the model, travel time is pretty significant savings as compared to the no build condition. In other words, in the future, if with the AMP, we see a 20 to 30% travel time savings compared to if you don't do the AMP under the same build condition. And then in downtown, again, the point we were making earlier, not a significant travel time reduction, primarily because of the lack of exclusive dedicated lanes in that. And then on the east side, travel times remain relatively close. We didn't spend as much time looking at that one, but that's generally the case. And the reason that is while it does have dedicated lanes on the east side, the congestion isn't there in the way it is on the west side. So it's more difficult for the AMP to make that time difference up and compare to car travel time. Cars work pretty well there now and will continue to do that in the future. Turn it back over to Steve.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I guess a couple key things we just want to remember is that, one, we really do have a model that we've updated it based on, the forecasts for a current development, and that it's an accurate model. The AMP BRT will provide a way to increase capacity to move people on this corridor, not just cars, but move people. And then the model also shows us that it demonstrates that we can kind of have both. We can move cars at an acceptable level of traffic flow and still have a bus rapid transit system working. The next slide here, we've got some a video that we'd like to show to kind of show you a little bit about what that model looks like. Was this?
Keep going.
Okay. Click again.
Can you see anything? Can you click on that?
Oh. This?
No, just click in there.
Gotcha. Okay.
This shows, I'll kind of narrate here, this shows the entire length of the west model. We're going to fly in here to the intersection of Natchez Trace. This is just to show you the number of links and the length of the model. This is an actual simulation of kind of what we see. It's in more detail than we normally look at the model in. But this is the PM peak hour beginning again at Natchez Trace. That's the big road coming up north to south, kind of coming in at an angle. So we're right in front of Centennial Park here. The yellow rectangle, I don't know if you recognize that as a bus or not, but that is in a transit vehicle in the transit lane. The big purple block it just stopped at is the 26th Avenue station. So that kind of orients you. The purple lines going across perpendicular to the station are just the crosswalks where we would have a pedestrian signal. Here comes another blue bus in the eastbound direction making the stop as well. Note the congestion. This is what we see every day. Things don't get better because the AMP comes. We still have a tremendous amount of congestion. It's very hard to turn that dial back and go back in time and say we're going to eradicate all of that. So you do still see the congestion working up. Working up here through the intersections, through Midtown. The two brown lines that the bus is traveling in is just a depiction of how that AMP lane would look in. Don't mistake that for it's going to be colored brown or anything like that. This is just simulation. And this is 31st, the intersection of 31st Avenue. Again, this model is taking place 30 minutes into the peak hour. So this is occurring in our model world at about 5:30 in the evening. And we will do runs all the way from about 5:05 to 6:05, and this is kind of in the middle of the model run. Some of those links that you're looking at there just kind of look like driveways. That's sort of how they function. They're idealized driveways. We don't have counts at every single driveway, so we idealize those to balance the traffic volumes. This is the station at Ackland Park Drive. You see the little green bars in front of both the traffic and the bus. That signifies a traffic signal. The bus is stopped on a green because he's dropping passengers, picking up passengers. If we were to zoom in more, I can't because this is a video, but we might see in those purple lines pedestrians. We have increased the number of pedestrian crossings under the build condition. That does have an impact on traffic operations. The yellow bus is coming up to a single lane. This is one of the locations where to preserve traffic capacity at the Murphy Road intersection. We've narrowed down to a single BRT lane. If a bus were to come up from the other side going eastbound, one of them would have to wait. Probably the bus in the off-peak direction would wait, but that's a service call that can be made. And this is the Murphy Road intersection. We've just done this one location because we know there's a lot of interest in this location. Sometimes it's helpful to see it, what the model looks like and how it functions, as well to see how the AMP might lay into a roadway configuration like this. You see the orange bus in the other lane. That is a local bus service. Steve mentioned that we've put those in there just in case the local bus service continues on that outside lane. And then this comes down to the I-440 ramps there.
You ever have any crashes?
I would say we do have crashes. Police don't come and they don't stop and those kind of things, but sometimes the model will run a car through each other.
I have a question. If you went back on that, there are places where it really, can you go back to the beginning of that video? Is that easy to do? Where it's got that zipper thing in the beginning and just past that, when it zooms in, right after it zooms in. Well, that may take too long. I'm sorry. But
do you know what road it's at? Is it at
Well, it's
Natchez
just
Trace?
right after the beginning of it, and I'm sorry, this is, I don't mean to take up a bunch of
Get out of
time.
this.
It really just struck me in places where there were the 2 amp lanes, or right about where the bus is approaching now. You know, there's a tremendous width there, 3 lanes that is taken up by the amp. 1 amp lane in each direction plus the loading zone. And that's almost 50% of the road there. And if all that were dedicated to traffic and not dedicated to buses, it seems like the traffic flow would improve. Now, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a mathematician. My simple analysis is that if you take away 2 and in places 3 existing lanes of traffic and dedicate them to buses only that come along once every 10 minutes, the capacity of those buses are going to carry an average of how many people per bus?
I think they have a capacity of 60.
I don't mean a capacity. The projections, how many people are going to actually be riding them?
I think we're going to talk about
on
ridership
average
next time. I think ridership will be covered next time, I think.
Is capacity 55 or 60?
It's like 60. It depends on how many people you want to have standing and that kind of thing. But think like 60.
But my point is that how many are actually going to be riding them? And, if it's, let's say, 10 on average, and that's 60 per hour of these people utilizing the amp, and it's taking up a lane or a lane and a half of traffic capacity, and where people can no longer use that lane for their cars. And currently, those lanes carry hundreds of people per hour in cars. It just seems like to me, common sense, that it's going to restrict the flow of people from one place to another.
Just to take off on that, I think that's the whole theory of mass transit, and I think you've hit it. And I think it's up to folks in mass transit to prove that you will do better with bigger vehicles and more people on them than you will with smaller vehicles and fewer people on them. And if the mass transit folks can't prove that, then they shouldn't build. But if they can prove that, they should build. And so I think that's what this analysis is all about.
But last time I saw, their projections showed an average of 8 people riding per bus. The buses come along once every 10 minutes.
I think that may not be right, but I think that's what we need to look at.
I thought it was.
That's what we need to look at next time. And frankly, if those are the numbers that are there, we ought not do this. But if the numbers demonstrate that you take cars off the road and you have more people on a bus and congestion gets better, that's the whole game. So I agree with you. I think that's what has to be demonstrated.
And I think in the long run, having buses adds capacity to a road where if you take that take that lane, put it in cars, you've got a maximum capacity. If you add capacity by bringing buses, whether it's 4 years out, 5 years out, whatever, you are increasing capacity by putting buses out there. But
I got one quick question to be answered. Just what is the capacity of one lane? What's the per hour of vehicles? 600?
No, it depends on the road. On West End, it's probably something on the order of 1,500 to 1,600 cars per hour per lane.
Per lane.
Now that goes up and down.
Ooh, you take a lane of traffic off 1,500 cars and you put them in a bus experience.
Well, we have to be careful when we say that, because what we've had to do with the existing condition, and the reason why we go to numbers and not necessarily just look at this is to help us really understand what we're thinking about. When we look at the existing condition, we know there are 7 lanes out there. 2 of those are sometimes used for parking, sometimes not. And the existing conditions does actually include observations that we made during peak hours to say there are cars parked in these locations. We've built those into the model. And then the algorithms are used to say, well, will someone travel in that outside lane or will they not? And so this is an objective way, as best we know how, to determine what are the impacts. Are we really taking a lane out, or are we taking some portion of a lane out because sometimes there's a car parked in it and sometimes there's not, and those kind of things. So that's when we feel like if we can go to those tables and talk about existing versus build versus no build and compare it that way, that's more beneficial. I would not agree to say that we are taking a lane out in most of the corridor. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right. Now, having gone through the traffic piece, we're going to change gears and just talk a little bit about Midtown and some questions that have come up. Again, this is just a sketch just for reference. Midtown would be this section between I-40 and 440. And I know we've seen this several times, but this is a common section through here. The goal would be, again, as you've seen even in the traffic simulation, to have the transit lanes in the center, and then keeping the lanes on the outside and removing the parking lanes in this section. One question that's come up is what happens when we remove these mid-block lefts by putting that curbed median in. And what we want to say first off is that lefts will continue, but they'll be at the intersections and there'll be U-turns allowed. So access will be provided by U-turns. The access will be safer. What's been found is that medians actually reduce crashes by like 37% and injuries by 48%. And as you can imagine, in an urban condition, with these mid-block lefts where people cross into driveways or that sort of thing, that's where a lot of what you see here are conflict points where people can have a crash. And this is sort of, again, looking at the numbers of those that can happen at just a road with the two-way left turn lane. So the median actually provides a couple things. It allows a little more safety for access. However, there will be lefts and U's at intersections to get people back to those mid-block locations. The next question that has come up on Midtown is just about construction itself. How would we go about minimizing some of the impact to businesses? The first thing is we'd want to be maintaining 2 lanes in each direction so that the traffic flow can be maintained. The other piece would be that we would have like a rolling closure. What that means is instead of closing the whole road, we'd close like several blocks at a time, finish the work, and then move on down the road instead of just closing everything. And we would be prescribing that as part of the construction phasing so that you're not closing everything. You just really can't operate that way. The other piece would be that you'd do part of the road at one time. You'd do, say, the north half, and then you'd do the south half. So again, all of it wouldn't be closed all at once. And then again, we would want to minimize the closure period, try to get the contractor in and out of there, and we would be looking at trying to get those several blocks done in 2 to 3 months. The other thing that we'd be looking at is to use off-peak hours of work. Of course, we wouldn't want the contractor to be working there during peak hour of traffic, so they'd have to work after peak hour or maybe early evenings so that they can get their work done. Again, we would work on trying to come up with ways to expedite that work. And then the other piece that we'd be looking at is using business signs in the construction zone so that you could inform people where to go to park for businesses. We've used information cards that can be handed out to potential customers, as well as information on the web and on the news. So these are some things that we can do to minimize the impact of construction. Construction will have some impact. I mean, we can't deny that at all. But these are some things that will help move it along and make things better. Any other comments or questions in this section?
Just, it's not directly related to the route, but I just can't help wondering where all the car currently parked on the street will magically disappear. Because we cannot predict those people parking on the street currently will use the AMP when it's built. So those people, wherever they're coming from, have to think they need some place to park their car. And, it's not your scope of work to provide those parking, but somebody has to think about it where those cars will park. So any solution to those parking?
I know we just talked about that this morning. We've been asked to take a look at a parking study to determine where those folks would park. So we're going to be doing that as the project moves forward.
One other question about the traffic counts and stuff, and when you said you took a kind of a picture of the traffic flow at certain times of the day and stuff. In what month was that done? Because the traffic varies depending on whether school's in session or not, and that's a significant impact. So did you always use the same month, or?
Do you recall the exact month when we did it? It was January.
After school.
Okay.
It was January.
When school's
After
in
school was-
session.
Yeah, we were trying to time that.
Okay.
Specifically, because that's a key factor. Other questions?
Any other questions about the Midtown route? So we've been through it 3 times. Are there any specific questions that people have? I'm kind of pulling like I did last time when we get to the end of listening to something about the route 2 and 3 different times, trying to get consensus about where we are in relation to that route, making sure that we have appended any questions or additional comments as we've looked at this block by block. Are there any additional questions or comments?
I have one, and it's buried in a couple of questions that have been asked, so I want to make sure what your final answer is. In the original route planning, you anticipated a speed of 12 miles per hour for the entire 7.1 mile route. And that was when you had 2, at least as it looks now, 2 more miles of dedicated lanes than you have now. Now, current MTA buses move at 10 miles per hour. I'm wondering if you are going to come out with a qualified and quantified speed of the bus on the route, on the entire route.
We can now with the model that we have, right, Jeff? We can provide a speed, an average speed.
But you don't have it as of now.
We have it as in I can ask Jeff to show me a number. I mean, it's in the model. I mean, we can pull out all sorts of data.
Obviously, I wouldn't just want to see the number. I would want to see how you arrived at that number.
Okay. I mean, we can generate that sort of information. I mean, the tool is.
It seems to me.
The tool is together now that we can now examine lots of different.
But it seems to me that the ability to attract ridership and the ability to move on the corridor faster, as has been said by several of my colleagues here today, is so significant that the fact that you don't have that yet, it just seems to me to be extremely important.
We have the information. We just have to tell you what the numbers are. We chose to present delay and those kinds of numbers.
Well, it seems to me that if it was, significantly, I mean, that is why we are considering doing this.
We can provide those numbers.
Right.
We can provide speeds and times, like we've had the request for a total time through the whole network.
For example, going back to, I think it was Mr. Hobbs' questions, and all of us have concerns about what's happening with the downtown piece, which links the east and west sides together, or currently does. Can buses actually arrive every 10 minutes when you've got this or ill-defined, unmeasured downtown piece of this?
I think that's, ill-defined and unmeasured, they've got it defined and measured, they just didn't present that definition and measurement, so I just
Didn't present that.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful for the committee to decide what we want, and have you all either present it in the interim or next meeting, or something. So, Diane, I think this is good information that we ought to have.
And I think
Sounds like they've just given us part of it so far.
Well, it sounds like that, Louis, but what concerns me is that under the assumptions that you made before we started the video, your concluding piece, you made some very straightforward, positive statements about this.
Right.
Impossible for us to feel that positive without, for example, these pieces.
You want to see the downtown section as well? Sure. I can show that.
Diane, what you said made me wonder, what is in 2018, what would be the travel time from 5 Points in the east to St. Thomas Hospital in the west by car compared to by the AMP?
We can do those numbers.
And I think, Lee, also implicit in your question is, if we don't build it, how long will it take? If we do build it, how long will it take? And then third, how long will it take to go if you're riding the AMP? And I think that what we've done so far is to say, or what they've done so far is to say east to downtown, downtown's the same as a car, so you'd be adding the same for all, for each alternative, and then from 12th west. So you've got, if you add just the east segment and the west segment, the middle piece is going to be the same under both scenarios. So if you're looking for a time difference between the two, you would find it in that summary.
Yeah, but that sounds like the model's been redone, which we were waiting for.
It's been,
and so now they've got the model. And so it'd be helpful just to know, from one end to the other, how long does it take? How many people are riding it? What's it take off the roads? What kind of folks are going to be riding it? I think they've already made the assumption that it's not folks who are driving now. It's all going to be new people. What does that mean? How does that work? So, I think it's helpful for the community to know what the new model is. So I think that's all we're saying.
And I would, back to the transit piece, and I'll get to you in a second, Richard. I think if there are questions over it takes these guys a while to prepare things. If over the next 2 or 3 days there are questions that members of the committee come up with that they'd like to have related to this traffic study provided, I think that would be great. I think being able to answer those would be good.
And I have one, you can't do a comparison between the automobile from 5 Points to St. Thomas with the AMP from 5 Points to St. Thomas, because if you were traveling in an automobile, you wouldn't go down Main Street, turn left on Fifth Avenue, stop at LP Field, go across the bridge, turn back right, go down to Gay Street, turn around, go down, that's not the way you're going to go through town.
So, Richard, tell me what you would like. I think that what you've done...
What a reasonable human being would do.
So how do you... What kinds of comparisons would you like? So they did it from east to downtown. They did it from west to 12th. Now we want to do the whole length, but now you're telling me the whole length doesn't matter. You just...
It matters on the distance or the time on the AMP, but you can't do a comparison on how long it takes. If you were going to compare it to a car, you'd probably say you leave 5 Points, you go all the way down Main Street, you go across the bridge, you go down to James Robertson Parkway, take a left, and shoot out Union, however you want to do it. But you would make it circuitous.
No, you'd probably take the interstate.
Yes, you would take the interstate, exactly is what you would do, which is what I do from West End. And it used to take me 12 minutes to get to work, but it takes me 15 now because they made the...
We could argue about alternative routes to St. Thomas a lot. What I'm really focused on here is you've given us a body of information that is based on standardized devices that give us the opportunity to look at what happens with the AMP along this route. I know that we want to compare it and everybody's got some little twist to their comparison or whatever, but this does create a standardized look that now when we make changes or we suggest changes, we can compare against that baseline. So I appreciate that, but I would take an entirely different route to St. Thomas than anybody.
You know, one thing that they talked about the AMP, one of the selling points was it would connect East Nashville to West Nashville. And also that it would be quick, that people would be able to travel more quickly on the AMP buses than they would be able to in a car based upon the dedicated lanes and stuff. And you know, that's the reason I was asking, what's the difference in time traveling on the AMP bus from 5 Points to St. Thomas compared to in a car? And just to see if that's panning out, because my suspicion is that it will take longer riding the AMP than it would in a car. So that's, you know.
We can add that all up, make those comparisons.
If I could bring us back to the Midtown route and review. We've looked at the Midtown route 3 times. This is very similar to our conversations about the east leg. It's very similar to our conversations about the downtown route. We're now looking at Midtown. We've gone through it 3 different times. Are there any, do we have consensus about the route itself? I know we've got questions about traffic, those different sort of things, but around the route itself and the way it's operating, are there comments, questions, things that we have not addressed as we've gone through this? Do we have consensus about how this is going block by block?
One last question about the specific route. And I think the analysis, like a service, level of service analysis, and certain intersection get worse if AMP was built, such as West End and Murphy, West End and 16th Avenue, Broadway and 13th Avenue. Could you give me specifically why it is the level of service is going worse in that certain scenario?
We'd have to take a look in detail of what's going on with the various legs, but we can't answer that. What I do want to point out, though, is we stay within acceptable levels for traffic. Those should all be like an E or better. But we can look at these specifically, and as we get into design, maybe there's ways we can improve that kind of thing. But we can certainly look at each leg and explain what's going on in the model that we've projected, why it's getting worse.
Okay. I thought on Murphy and West End case, maybe there was, currently peak hours, we have 3 traveling lane, but now with AMP being center lane, traveling lane will be reduced to 2 in a peak hour. I thought that might be the one contributing.
Yeah, at Murphy Road, there's actually no change to the actual lanes at the intersection. Where you have a change is between Murphy Road and Ackland Park. And you're right, that does have an impact on traffic operations there. And so we've been able to make some changes to how that Murphy Road intersection operates to bring it back to, as good as we're able to show it. But that's why I pointed that out, that there are some that, because of the amount of traffic, the volume that we need to accommodate, we have to adjust signal timings, and it's just going to degrade, by what Steve is saying is a relatively small amount. I could say delay gets twice as big at an intersection, but it may go from 4 seconds to 8 seconds. Really doesn't matter, and you're still saying it's twice as big. So we have to be careful the numbers we're dealing with when we're talking about an increase in 8 or 10 or 12 seconds of delay. In the grand scheme, the numbers we work with all the time, that's not a very significant increase.
And also one more question is, because we are analyzing the main West End and Broadway Street, so we are not analyzing like a side street like 31st Avenue and Murphy Road. And this coming, taking up, prioritize this main street, so that will have another impact on those side street coming into this main street.
Those are accounted for. We do take a look at those, and those go into those numbers when we were talking about overall intersection delay, that we do want to make sure we're capturing the delay brought by those minor street approaches. So those are in there. Now, if you talk about 31st or Blakemore at 21st, that's not in the model. And that would get back to the diversion analysis and things we'll be looking at under a future condition. But for this corridor, we do look at the side streets.
One question that troubles me is that the entire project was estimated to be $175 million. And several aspects concern me. One is that just my gut feel is that I think it will make, I may be wrong, but I think it will make traffic worse rather than better. And it spends a tremendous amount of money to possibly improve public transit for a relatively few amount of people, when $175 million could be spent to greatly improve public transportation for people in other areas. This is not an area of town where people don't have any other choice of transportation. There are a lot of areas of town where people are totally dependent on public transportation and need it and don't have very good public transportation. So, are we spending a tremendous amount of money on a problem that may make things worse, when we could really greatly improve public transit in other areas for those who truly need it?
Just to speak to that.
I hear people applauding, but just to try to respond to that pretty quickly, we just spent an hour and a half on a model that says it makes it better. Now, we can believe the model or not believe the model, but the model, that's why I asked, does the model work around the country? And if the model works around the country, that's the model. So
first thought is, I may be wrong.
First thought is whether it improves transportation or not, and I think we've just heard for an hour and a half that it does, so we can believe that or not. Second thought is, we can't use the 175 anywhere else. So we can use part of it somewhere else, but 100 of it is coming from the feds, I think.
No, 75 at the most.
75 is coming from the feds. They're only going to give it to us for this, so we can't.
But $100 million is coming from the city.
That is correct. And, well, how much? 59.
Well, then where's the rest coming from?
I'm not sure, to be honest, that it's going to be 175. So I think we haven't played with those numbers yet. We've changed the project a lot, and it may not be anywhere near 175. I think that's where we're going. It's not a perfect world. That's like, I could say it'd be better to use this money for education, which I believe, but no, you can't use this money for education. So, there you are.
The focus of this group is to review these plans and react to these plans. I'm sure there'll be an ongoing debate with regards to larger projects somewhere further down the road. But I've really tried to stay focused as a member of this group on the specific task we've been given, which is to hear what you're saying, have you react to what we're saying, and see what those solutions are that come from you after that. So I just want, even though I might have a perspective and a viewpoint on whether it's worth it, whether it's not worth it, et cetera, I'm trying to stay focused on the task at hand.
Well, that's great. But here's our problem, and it comes from the admission that Mark Sturdivant made earlier, which is, this is the project that he got handed, that you got handed, and that we all got handed. And you might as well be trying to put a size 9 foot into a size 6 shoe.
Okay, Diane, enough of we've all done a really good job about not editorializing. So here's my question back to the committee. We've looked at this particular part of the route. We have focused on it block by block. Are there specific concerns with that block by block review that are out there that we have?
Yes.
Okay?
And
What are they? Because I'd love to put
I
those.
stated them just a moment ago with regard to the benefits that this is supposed to provide, not just in its first year, but out 25 years. The speed at which it travels makes a difference to the ridership. The poor connection to some of the major destinations in the Midtown area, hospitals, and other venues, Bridgestone Arena comes to mind. People simply are deterred by taking a mass transit option when they either have to make transfers or they have to walk more than a tenth of a mile. Is that a problem? It's something that has to be considered. The ridership figures have to be considered because it is more than just the physical location of the route. The physical location of the route is what we were handed.
So my question is, so the route that we have been talking about for the last 3 times, are there specific questions about that? I've got the fact that you're, concerned about the benefits. You're concerned that it doesn't connect all the different pieces. I mean, the transit system that I think we would all like is one that would stretch to virtually every block in the city. It would be a great thing to have happen. It would be great if we had mass transit to Murfreesboro and to Franklin and to Clarksville, and that we could connect all these things. But that is, hopefully in years of my lifetime, that will be happening. But we're focused on this one piece. So are there any other issues or concerns that people have about this specific route?
No.
Okay. The next item is the West Nashville route. We've got a few slides on that, I believe, and just a few minutes to do them in.
We really just have one slide. Just want to report back our status. In March, we did have some design meetings, and we're looking at scheduling some meetings to discuss just the station locations. As we've kind of pointed out, there's some places that we can locate those, but we're working on that. So really not a lot of new information on West End at this point.
So maybe we can even wrap this up early unless there are questions, but here are, and I think that we have been introduced to a lot of information today. If they're specific, we've made several specific questions of Steve and Jeff and the team, and we will maybe even get that list of questions out to get those confirmed. Any additional questions that you've got, if you can get us those in 3 or 4 days, that way we can get the models run to be able to take care of that. And I really appreciate everybody's time, attention, discussion, and I think what Richard and Arnett said at the very beginning is it's been a very good education for all of us getting through this. So thank you very much.